Don't get cocky, mongrel. I am a king who has tasted all the pleasures the world has to offer. Hold your tongue and listen.
Gilgamesh is known as mankind's first hero, but his story isn't limited to just the Fate series. In fact, it's shaped our modern lives more than you could ever imagine. If you're here to watch a historically accurate depiction of the man who tried to conquer death, then don't click off. I've worked really hard to make this video as accurate as possible. And if you're here to watch the story of the real anime Giga Chad and how he goes from an arrogant dictator to a benevolent king, then grab a drink and some snacks, because this is the tale of the hero of heroes. Before we jump into the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's worth taking a second to understand the roots of this iconic character and his influence on human culture and literature. Mesopotamia was a region in 3100 BC, now covered by Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. It had its fair share of events, from the reigns of the Sumerians and the Akkadians to being eventually conquered by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. But nestled within this timeline is a certain story that's so profound, so raw, it's been echoing for millennia. Now I know what you're thinking. This is an anime video, not a history lesson. But the thing is, all evidence points to Gilgamesh actually existing 5,000 years ago, and his legend is actually recorded in mankind's oldest poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The epic is thought to have been orally transmitted for generations before it was finally written down on clay tablets in one of the earliest systems of writing. To put into context how old that is, it makes him almost 3,000 years older than Jesus. But this is still an anime video, so I wouldn't take everything as being literal. Just know that some of the stuff is actually reported to have happened. Gilgamesh is known as the king of all heroes because every single myth that followed, every story, every legend from every culture and every religion in every country, it all borrows inspiration from mankind's first hero. The strongest examples of this are in the biblical tale of Noah and the Greek myth of Hercules, and his story greatly influences modern literature too, like The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. The story of the Epic of Gilgamesh was discovered on 12 clay tablets found among the ruins of the ancient library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in modern-day Iraq. These tablets are dated to around the 7th century BC, but are believed to preserve much older stories that were likely first told orally and later written down. These ancient tablets provide the most comprehensive version of the epic, but parts of the tale appear on other scattered fragments found at different ancient sites across the Middle East. There are actually two versions of Gilgamesh in the Fate series, and they're technically different people. Well, they're not, but they kind of are. Let's start with Archer Gilgamesh. We're in the year 2800 BC, the age of the gods, where divine beings and humans walked the earth together. Some gods were just, while others treated their subjects as slaves. One day, a greater god called Safar invaded the earth, killing many of the gods. She was eventually defeated, but the damage was already done, and the rule the gods had over the humans had severely weakened. In order to preserve their rule, the gods needed a keystone, a wedge of heaven that connected the rising humans to the fading gods. That keystone was Gilgamesh. Born from the goddess Ninsun and the human king Lugalbanda, Gilgamesh was 2/3 god and 1/3 human, and ruled over humanity with the mission to observe and adjudicate. The city Gilgamesh ruled over was called Uruk, situated in present-day Iraq. Yet, Uruk was far from ordinary. It stood as a testament to human achievement. Its towering walls were not just architectural marvels, but also echoed the very ambitions of its people. Conceived under the watchful eye of Gilgamesh, these walls became more than just mere defensive structures. They symbolized humanity's victory over nature. This audacious statement reflected Gilgamesh's own beliefs that he stood above the very earth. As evidence of its profound legacy, archaeologists pinpoint Uruk as one of humanity's earliest urban epicenters, with roots as deep as 4000 BC. Its intricate temples, ziggurats, and canal systems all serve as relics of its storied past. This transcendence over nature and the very walls that proclaimed it became the lens through which Gilgamesh viewed himself. To him, the limitations of divinity and humanity were but mere lines in the sand. He believed that while no human could rival the gods themselves could never experience the complexities of human existence. And since Gilgamesh was both human and god, he perceived himself not just above his subjects, but even the deities that breathed life into him. His self-awareness was, in many ways, his crowning achievement. Gilgamesh grew to become a cruel, arrogant, and oppressive tyrant who subjugated his people to forced labor and sexual abuse. And just to be clear, I'm downplaying that a lot, because even I don't want to talk about some of the disgusting things he is historically reported to have done. Naturally, the gods didn't want this, but they couldn't exactly do anything about it because, well, Gilgamesh just wouldn't listen. So instead, the king of gods Anu and the goddess of creation Aruru created a monster out of clay called Enkidu to punish the arrogant king. But there was a problem. You see, Enkidu didn't have a soul, and so couldn't make rational decisions. So the gods sent a divine harlot to sleep with him. And I'm not even joking. After this, Enkidu takes human form, and his final appearance is very similar to the girl he slept with. And that's why he has such a feminine form. It's definitely not because having more hot girls leads to more sales. Now I know what you're thinking. This video is getting pretty long. Well, I think it is. Technically I haven't finished recording, so I don't actually know how long. Before we dive into what happened between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, let's talk about Gilgamesh's powers, or more specifically, Archer Gilgamesh's powers. In Fate, heroic spirits have noble phantasms, which are special weapons or abilities that embody the legend of that hero. For example, King Arthur's noble phantasm, or rather, Artoria's noble phantasm, again, because more hot girls equals more sales, is Excalibur, the sword of promised victory. Gilgamesh has a lot of noble phantasms, and I mean a lot. It would take me an entire video to cover them all, so for now, I'll talk about a few. The first is his ability, Shah Nakba Imaru, or clairvoyance, which lets him see into the future and see the truth of anything he looks at. So in a fight, he knows exactly who his opponent is, what their abilities are, and how best to defeat them. Or if he's playing chess, then he knows the correct move every time. This ability is pretty overpowered, but the thing is, Gilgamesh barely uses it. Why? Because he's an arrogant prick. He believes himself to be so powerful that he doesn't even need it most of the time. And he's kinda right, especially when you learn about his next noble phantasm, the Gate of Babylon. During his time as ruler of Uruk, Gilgamesh amassed every single weapon on earth and stored them all in his treasury. And I genuinely mean every single weapon. And the Gate of Babylon allows him to choose whichever weapon he wants, whenever he wants, wherever he wants. But that's not how Gilgamesh uses it.
These mages never learn, do they? You should never give a human heart to a doll. Humans are simply not capable of equaling your pure loyalty.
Every single weapon is fired out at a speed of Mach 10, and he has so many that he could go his entire life firing them away without having to use a single one twice. What makes this ability even more OP is that these weapons aren't just ordinary weapons. Every single one of them is a noble phantasm in itself. Artoria's Excalibur, Lance's Gaybolg, Hercules' 9 lives. Gilgamesh has all these weapons in his treasury. But how's that possible if these heroes came after Gilgamesh? Well, that's because they're prototypes. I mentioned earlier that almost every legend told today is in some way inspired by the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in the same way, every weapon used today has a design that is somehow based on those in his treasury. He owns every weapon that existed and owns every weapon that is yet to exist. And don't get me wrong, while they're technically prototypes, it is said that if you compare the original weapon to Gilgamesh's prototype, the original will look like a fake. That's how well made the prototype is. Not only that, but in a fight, the prototype will beat the original every time. Now that doesn't mean if Gilgamesh were to use Excalibur and fight Artoria in a one-on-one sword fight that he would win. He'd probably lose. And that's because he's a jack of all trades, but master of none. Gilgamesh is a brilliant swordsman, but these other heroic spirits have spent their entire lives mastering a single weapon, and thus can use them to their full potential, which Gilgamesh cannot. That being said, Gilgamesh does have one weapon that only he can use, one so powerful that it defies reality itself. But I'll talk about that later. Enkidu eventually confronts Gilgamesh outside the temple of Uruk, stating that he needed to be punished for disobeying the gods. But Gilgamesh isn't one to let anyone talk down on him.
Who gave you permission to look upon me, you rabid dog?
So he engages Enkidu in a battle that lasts days on end. And this was pretty new to Gil. It was the first time he ever came across someone equal in strength to him, which forced him to use his Gate of Babylon. Gilgamesh was furious that someone had caused him to waste his weapons. He was humiliated, but eventually he stopped caring, and he even started to enjoy himself after finally finding someone worthy to be in his presence. This battle lasted so long and was so fearsome that Gil exhausted every single weapon in his treasury. But by this point, Enkidu was severely weakened and Gilgamesh had won. But instead of finishing him off, Gilgamesh extended a hand to him. He saw Enkidu as an equal, and Enkidu ended up becoming Gil's first friend, his only friend. One day, Gilgamesh set his sights upon defeating the beast of the gods, Humbaba. But the thing is, the gods hadn't told him to do this, and he wasn't doing it for the sake of his people either, because, well, he didn't care about them. Gilgamesh simply saw Humbaba as something that needed to be removed from the earth in order to see out his mission. Gilgamesh had always disobeyed the gods so that he could be far removed from them, and he wanted his people to hate him so he could be far removed from them, because that was the only way he could be truly neutral, because that was the mission for which he was born.
なぜあの神獣を倒すと決めたんだい。あれは君のウルクを荒らしたとはいえ、民のためでもないだろう。君の圧政は民を苦しめてきた。その君がなぜ民の心配をする。
この星の未来を築くのが王の役目だからな。
王の役目？どうしてその言葉を人々に伝えないんだい。今のままだと君を理解する者は一人もいない。最後まで一人きりだ。
一人ではない。今語り聞かせている者がいよう。
ああ、僕は道具だ。道具には北風も太陽も必要ない。だからこそ世界の終わりまで君のそばにいられる。
In this sense, you could argue that the reason that Gilgamesh was such an abhorrent dictator was because he didn't want to get close to his subjects so that he could remain impartial. I don't know how much truth there is to that, and it could simply be a result of the story being altered as it was passed from generation to generation. Either way, seeing Gilgamesh's resolve, Enkidu pledges his loyalty to him, and the two go on numerous adventures together, which ends with Gilgamesh becoming the wealthiest and most powerful king on earth. He amassed so much power that even the gods had no choice but to acknowledge it. One goddess in particular, Ishtar, the goddess of fertility, asked Gilgamesh to marry her. Marrying a goddess was actually one of Gilgamesh's duties, as it would see the continued reign of the gods over the humans. But Gilgamesh said no because
if she breathes, she's a god!
Enraged, Ishtar went to her father Anu and asked him to unleash the divine beast Gugalana on Uruk. This divine beast devastated the land for 7 years before Gilgamesh and Enkidu were finally able to defeat it. But this came at a price. Ishtar asked the gods to sentence Gilgamesh and Enkidu to their deaths. While the gods agreed, they couldn't do anything to Gil, but they could to Enkidu because he was their direct creation. Enkidu's clay body weakened and weakened until it would eventually return to the very earth from which it had come. And Gilgamesh stayed by his friend's side until the very end. While this event is not shown in the anime, it is mentioned in the original Sumerian poem from 3,000 years ago, translating as follows.
なかったんだ。 なかったんだよ、ギル。でも思えば一つだけあったんだ。君に会いたかった。君と話したかった。この胸に残る多くの思い出の話を、その感想を友として君に伝えたかった。
It's honestly a rather heartbreaking end to their friendship. One would have thought that the arrogant and prideful king of heroes would have had a rather stoic response. But history says otherwise.
勝手に出歩いたりするまい。あるかないかではなく、生きがるなよ雑種。母親も生まれも気に留めず、ただ望むことをなすがいい。かつての俺や奴のようにな。
And with this, Enkidu returned to the earth, leaving nothing behind but Gilgamesh's thunderous cry. And for those of you who have watched Fate Zero, you'll know that Gilgamesh kept this promise even thousands and thousands of years later.
Why would you not ally yourself with me? The two of us together could conquer the universe and beyond if we desired it.
You never cease to amuse me, mongrel. It has been ages since I laughed so hard at gibberish spouted by one who is not a fool. But unfortunately, I have had one comrade, and he is all I ever intend to have.
After Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh realized something. As he was 1/3 human, he too would one day die. If this were to happen, he would not be able to fulfill his dream of watching over humanity until the end of time. And it also meant that he would not be able to carry out his purpose as the Wedge of Heaven. And thus, for the first time in his existence, the King of Heroes felt fear. And this brings us to the core of the ancient Sumerian poem. Gilgamesh, wanting to beat death, set out on a journey to find the only treasure that he didn't have in his vault, the Herb of Immortality. What does this herb do? Well, it's in the name, so figure it out for yourselves. Gilgamesh wandered the earth for several decades in search for this herb, and eventually stumbles upon a wise sage in the underworld that guides him in the right direction. Sure enough, Gil finds the herb and is absolutely euphoric because he has just beaten death. And all that's left for him to do is return to Uruk and see over his people until the end of time. Before beginning his journey back home, Gil decides to wash off in a nearby spring, where he first places the herb on the ground. However, as fate would have it, a serpent stumbles upon the bathing Gilgamesh, and after seeing the herb, it eats it. And a little fun fact, it's thought that the Sumerians and many other cultures that followed believed that snakes have the ability to shed their skin because this serpent ate the Herb of Immortality, giving snakes the ability to be reborn. Much like the biblical tale of Adam and Eve and the serpent, this story serves as a stark reminder of life's impermanence and the inevitable reality of death. By losing the herb, Gilgamesh confronts the bitter truth: immortality remains beyond human grasp. After realizing what happened, you'd think Gilgamesh would be upset, or that he would be outraged, but he wasn't. He realized that death was unavoidable, and by dying, he wasn't abandoning his duty, he was completing it, because it was the most human thing he could do. He realized that you didn't die because you were human, but you were human because you died. And with his Shah Nakba Imaru, Gilgamesh was able to see into the future, and what he saw was exactly what he loved about the humans in the first place. He saw the continued growth of the human race, the way their knowledge developed, and the way they used their resources to reach for the stars and beyond. With this new outlook, Gilgamesh returned to Uruk as a changed man. While Archer Gilgamesh was an arrogant tyrant that did disgusting things, Caster Gilgamesh was kind, generous, and benevolent. He loved his people so much that he actually gave away all the swords in his treasury. You see, these two versions of Gilgamesh are still the same person. It's just that Archer Gilgamesh is the version of Gilgamesh we see before Enkidu's death, and Caster Gilgamesh is the one we see after the death of his friend. And technically, Caster Gilgamesh is weaker than Archer Gilgamesh, and the biggest reason for that is the fact that he gave away so many of his weapons, weakening his Gate of Babylon. But Caster Gilgamesh also had a noble phantasm that Archer Gilgamesh didn't: Melamu Dingir, or King's Signal Cannon. If you've ever seen the movie 300, it's a lot like that, but except for arrows, he's firing every single weapon he has at his disposal. As I mentioned, Caster Gilgamesh was much more generous than Archer Gilgamesh. As such, he gave away his treasures for them to be used in cannons should the city of Uruk ever need protection. As such, this noble phantasm is classed as an anti-army ability, firing every weapon mankind had in one go.
今よりティアマトへウルクの最後の意地を見せてくれよ。そこでしかと見届けるがいい。俺を誰と心得る。このウルクに設置したディンギル360機、すべて俺が作り、魔力を込め統括するもの。死ぬ気でこの体を酷使すれば一斉に操れるわ。ティアマト神の足止め、ここで見事に果たしてみせよう。
But if you think that's powerful, there's one more noble phantasm I haven't yet mentioned, but this one didn't belong to Caster Gilgamesh. It belonged to his earlier version, Archer Gilgamesh. Imagine a weapon so mighty that it not only holds power beyond comprehension, but also taps into the very essence of our universe's creation. Enter Eiyuu, the Sword of Rupture.
Oh, Eiyuu, I know I've disturbed your slumber, but I require your company for this banquet. Fret not, you won't be bored.
Eiyuu is the pinnacle of noble phantasms and is the strongest weapon in Gilgamesh's treasury, and it's unique to only him. You might think it kind of looks like a sword, but it actually isn't. It was designed before the concept of a sword even existed, and so it's in its own class. To even summon Eiyuu, Gilgamesh first has to unlock the depths of his treasury with a key that only he possesses, and after that we see the mere act of obtaining Eiyuu disrupt reality itself. Designed intricately, each section of Eiyuu represents the heavens, the earth, and the underworld, with the sections rotating in opposite directions, echoing the universe's vast expanse. Gilgamesh claims that the sword knows the truth of the world where it once existed, and by using its power, it's able to bestow its knowledge upon others. To Gilgamesh, Eiyuu is more than just a weapon, it's an entity. He treats it like a person, he talks to it, respects it, and unleashes its might only on those he deems truly worthy.
Eiyuu was forged only for supreme kings, and someone like you isn't even worthy of gazing upon it.
This isn't just any weapon, it's a creation from even before our planet's dawn, crafted by an unknown god and was once used to split the heavens and earth. It's classed as an anti-universe noble phantasm with power unlike any other, and its ability is called Enuma Elish. And to use the ability, Gilgamesh first recites an incantation. This is actually another Babylonian tale from thousands of years ago, titled The Story of Creation, but that's like a whole other 1 hour video. I know that I've been describing Eiyuu as a weapon, but it isn't that at all. In fact, that barely scratches the surface of its true nature.
What the hell is that? I can't read it. I can't get any information on that weapon's construction at all.
It's not an exaggeration when I say that Enuma Elish has the power to tear the universe apart, yet even such an unparalleled force had its moment of surprise. There is one recorded instance of it being stopped, something which shocked even Gilgamesh, but that's a story for another time. Gilgamesh is only seen using this ability on 2 occasions, once against Ryder and another against Tiamat, a primordial deity that almost destroyed the world and was so powerful that even Gilgamesh couldn't defeat her. Or rather, Caster Gilgamesh couldn't, because like I said before, Archer Gilgamesh is on an entirely different level.
I shall perform this final blow as a parting gift to you. I will tell you of the beginning. Heaven and earth split. Nothingness congratulated creation. My sword of rupture cleaved the world. Mortar of the stars, heaven's hell, is the eve of creation's celebration. Now you shall die and be silent! Enuma Elish!
We see Gilgamesh use Eiyuu's full strength against Enkidu, not in their first battle, but rather when they met again thousands of years later in Fate, Strange Fate. Here, the world itself is sucked into the void created by the sword and it begins tearing apart, but Enkidu has his own version of Enuma Elish and thus was able to hold the world together. The battle is described as follows by those that observed it.
あの広場での決闘の続きも、それはそれで楽しそうだね。
This meeting here is honestly beautiful, and I know that's a weird way to describe what is essentially a war to the death between mages, but that's all I can say about it. We know how much Gilgamesh values Eiyuu. He is disgusted by the thought of someone unworthy even laying their eyes on it, and it's so rare that we ever see him even using it. But when he realizes that his opponent is his first and only friend, he pulls out Eiyuu with zero hesitation.
まさか君なのか。
お前なのか。雑種の小娘よ、喜べ。どうやらこの戦、俺が本気になるべき価値となったようだ。
This is the happiest we ever see Gilgamesh. He spends the entire battle laughing his heart out, and we see Enkidu with a hand to his ear, admiring the sound of his friend's laughter as if it were a song. It's a tragedy that Gilgamesh will never be able to see Enkidu again, but that's life. As sad as it is to admit, we all have people we care about and that will be gone from our lives forever. It's no wonder that Gilgamesh's greatest treasure wasn't any of his riches, any of his weapons, the Holy Grail, or even Eiyuu. It was his friendship with Enkidu. And with that, I've covered a fraction of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It took a lot of work and there's a lot I couldn't cover. I'll probably make a video dedicated to Eiyuu and another on Enkidu, but I'll warn you, be prepared to cry. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. If not, leave a dislike and let me know how I can improve. See you next week.
原書を語る。天地は分かれ無は快略をことほう。世界を裂くは我が怪力剣。
呼び起こすは星の息吹。人と共に歩み、僕はゆえに
星々を回す渦、天上の地獄とは創世前夜の終着よ。エヌマ